What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and today we have last minute injury updates for week 8. We are talking again with Tom Chris from the fantasy injury team. He is a doctor of physical therapy. We bring him on every week because I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to the injury stuff. So we have a ton of guys that we need to talk about here, a lot of game time decisions. How are we doing, Tom?
I'm doing well, man. A lot of guys to talk about this week. Fortunately, none are like season-ending ones that we need to talk about, but definitely that actually, to me, makes it more relevant what we're going to talk about here because there's a lot of reading between the lines.
Yeah, and because it's funny because it's not the bye week, like bye Mageddon or whatever, everyone's playing, which means there's even more players who are iffy on whether or not they're going to play. Which first up, we have pretty much the man of the hour, the guy who's sort of been everywhere this week. We have Brock Purdy. So he's dealing with a concussion. And it's funny, I'm kind of curious your thoughts because it's always been, I mean, every time we've met, concussions are tough because, we're not in there really evaluating the player. But we've seen, I think it was Roshan Johnson, Tank Dell now get caught up on this last stage or, last gate level of this concussion protocol. Kind of how are you reading between the lines here? And do you think there's any, this is almost conspiracy talk, but I almost think Kyle Shanahan and like his quarterback, I almost think if he could push him through, it would be this situation.
Well, what they look for in that last phase is the last phase of the concussion protocol is full go in practice. Now, and part of that is contact. Now, with a quarterback, they're not getting contacted in practice. So that could be some of the differences with these other position groups where they are taking on contact. Because what they're looking for is, do symptoms come on with this full activity? And with a quarterback, they're not running quite as much. They're not stressing their body as much. They're not taking on contact in that last phase just because that's the nature of their position. And in practice, they don't get touched. So from that standpoint, I could actually see it being easier for a quarterback to clear this last phase than a different position group. And the reason we don't have confirmation yet is because they want to monitor how the player does for several hours after. So Purdy's actually an interesting example because he didn't even develop symptoms until after the game. So concussions are so variable, they're so different person to person that we really need that 24-hour buffer after practice to see how the player really responds. The good thing is that we'll know before really all the games tomorrow if he's going to play or not. So we'll be able to make that start sit decision. But for now, we just got to keep sitting tight.
Yeah, the the concussion stuff's been so weird this year or not weird, it's been good that they've been so on top of it, but with my Jets, like I had no clue that Sauce Gardner, like he didn't come out of whatever game it was before the Eagles. I think that was the Broncos maybe, and then he gets hit with like a late concussion. He thought he was sick, and he didn't even clear it over the bye week. He just now a couple days ago cleared the concussion protocol. But with Brock Purdy, we're assuming that if he does play, not really any drop offs in production. Like he should
Yeah,
be fine.
no,
Ayuk and those guys.
no, it shouldn't affect his production at all.
Yep, exactly. Now, the next guys we have are a pair of wide receivers. One of them, Waddle, was dealing concussions early in the season, but now we have Tyreek Hill with a hip injury, and I have Waddle written down for a back. I'm sort of curious what you're seeing with these Miami Dolphins wide receivers here.
Yeah, I'll start with Waddle. So he's now off the injury report. With these types of injuries, when it's a back injury, the first thing you want to rule out is a fracture or a disc injury. We would know if those were the case because those are pretty significant. They're not that hard to diagnose, and they're the type of injuries that would keep him out for a while. And that's not the case with him. So those are clear. So what's likely happening, I see this all the time in my clinical practice, is the back can just get really like stiff and jammed up. So when you, particularly for a football player, when you take a big hit that stresses the back, maybe it jams some of those joints together, the muscles, which are gigantic muscles, will then just kind of guard. They clamp down, they tighten up, they spasm to protect that region. And a lot of times they're doing more than they need to do, these muscles to protect. So you just got to get things loosened up, get things moving a little bit better with with acute low back pain, that's really not that hard to do. So it doesn't surprise me that we've seen his practice participation increase throughout the week, and he's off the injury report now. He should be able to play at a very high level. This totally could flare up though with the wrong kind of hit, but Waddle's ceiling, you're willing to take that risk. It's not like it's a super high likelihood that he gets injured again, but it's definitely present, the injury risk. But again, like to me, his upside far outweighs the risk of benching him. And then with Tyreek Hill, I almost think he was messing with us Wednesday. Like, I think they were like, "Hey, let's like mess with the media and all these football fans." I don't doubt that he does have a little bit of a hip injury, but the way like to his comments Wednesday were really concerning, and then he practices Thursday. So with any kind of hip injury, that's of course it can affect running. It's a lower body injury. We're going to see it affect more the lateral motions, agility, cutting, which is a big part of Hill's game. But he's so fast, so quick that even if he is a little bit slower, he's still faster than everybody else. And our data on fantasy injury team shows that there's really no decline in fantasy production from receivers when they return from a hip injury. So both these guys, Waddle and Hill, you can keep them in your lineup as you normally do and expect a pretty good day.
Yep, and it seems like with Waddle, it's just like a slight re-injury risk. I will say he was looking like he was walking pretty rough behind the end zone. Like I remember seeing him walk to the locker room or whatever. But it seems like you're saying like, yeah, your back can just sort of get jammed up, and I guess he probably had somebody from the staff sort of working with him in between coming back to play. Now another Miami Dolphin we have is Raheem Mostert here, who came up with an ankle injury. It seemed like his status to play was like genuinely in the air. It seems like it's a little bit more positive recently, but what are you seeing? I think that he didn't practice Wednesday and then got 2 limiteds in with an ankle.
Yeah, he's going to play. Minor ankle sprain. He said he's good to go, though. When it's this minor, I really don't expect it to have much of a hit on production. Running backs do see about a 10% decline in their fantasy production. That's not enough to scare me at all. With ankle sprains, the concern is more when it's like a moderate to severe sprain, because then you start to lose some stability from those ligaments passively secure the ankle. And when there's true tissue damage to them, that some of that passive stability is lost, and that can make it hard to really change directions quickly and confidently, and also increases risk for re-injury. But with not missing one practice and then being able to participate the other days, that tells us that it's not that major of an injury, and we really don't need to be concerned.
Now, somebody who had like a pretty similar injury, I guess, was like an ankle. I remember like on the broadcast, like TJ Hockenson, like the coach O'Connell was telling him to get down, which I think Joe Buck thought it was like a gamesmanship thing when it just seemed like just take your injury time out and just relax for a second. What did you see with Hockenson? It felt like he left the game a couple times with like a lower ankle foot kind of thing going on here. So, what are your thoughts on sort of Hockenson for this week?
His is a foot injury, and they're kind of vague with what exactly, like the foot. There's a lot of different bones and joints in there, so we don't have total specifics on that. And he's off the injury report. He's gonna play, but there's still reason for some concern here, because the foot takes so much load with athletics, and it literally needs to change shapes with the different phases of walking and running, and depending on like the stresses you're putting on the foot. So little injuries can progress with more and more action. It doesn't happen every time, and they can put plates in there. They can tape his foot to reduce the stresses through it. But we saw last year Rashad Bateman had a midfoot injury, rehabbed it a couple weeks, came back, and then it got worse, and he needed a Liz Frank surgery that ended his season. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen with Hockenson, but that's definitely in the back of my head. Like, I hope this doesn't get worse for him. Um, as it stands this week, I'm still starting him. I mean, he's one of the better tight ends. He may have a harder time with getting down the field, but he's still a big body, reliable hands, so he should be productive. I am just a little concerned for a re-injury there, or
Yeah, that
further.
makes sense that it could be a cascading effect with his foot, but Yeah, I'm with you as well. If you have him, like I'm not reaching to the waivers and grabbing like a Michael Mayer or something to fill in for Hockenson. Like if he's ready to go, he's ready to go. What it does tell me is maybe a little bit of a boost for a guy like Addison, where maybe Hockenson gets a little bit less work, but I don't know. Like he could still catch a touchdown. I think that he'll be fine this week versus the Packers, who aren't a great defense, but we have two Packers in their own right. That have been. It feels like we talk about these guys every single week. We've had Christian Watson with hamstrings. We have Aaron Jones dealing with the hamstring. We have Christian Watson now dealing with a knee injury, but it seems like he's doing okay. Where are you at on these two Packers, specifically Aaron Jones first? Because it seems like he didn't practice early in the week, and like that really scared people off. It seems like he's kind of a little bit more in the direction of like playing and being just fine. Where are you at with him?
He's not on the injury report anymore. A lot of times, especially with Aaron Jones, it's his sixth year in the league. He doesn't really need to practice as much as a younger guy would. Getting to be older as a running back, they want to really just kind of limit his exposure to injury throughout the week. So here's the deal with him. He had the hamstring injury week 1, rehabbed it a couple weeks, came back and only saw 35% of snaps, got re-injured, missed another game, and then I think they had their bye in there, and then comes back, gets 36% of snaps. So we're seeing a pattern here where Green Bay is very slow to bring their players back after injury. But this is game 2 now, and there's no reports of setbacks. Again, he's not on the injury report. So I would expect that 36% snap rate to go way up this week, probably pushing more like 50%, to the point where he can get enough volume to be productive with how talented he is. He's got a nose for the end zone. He's a great pass catcher. The question is, like, Green Bay kind of stinks. Their offense isn't very good. Jordan Love isn't very good. And that may even go in his favor because he's more of the pass catching back. I know A.J. Dillon does catch balls, but if you watch the two of them, Aaron Jones is way more effective as a pass catcher. So I don't hate starting him this week. I don't know that he's going to get you 30 points, but he should be fairly productive, definitely better than he's been the last 2 games he's played. As far as Christian Watson, his knee looked bad in the game last week, but he didn't miss practice at all this week, not on the injury report. This is not going to affect him whatsoever. If he's a guy that you, injury aside, would be starting, then like you don't need to have any additional concern secondary to this injury.
Yeah, I ranked Christian Watson around like wide receiver 38 earlier in the week, but now that we're getting positive news, like that was kind of assuming that he was going to like play through injury. Knowing that now, I'm probably going to move him up to like the low 30s, like probably in like this Josh Palmer, Deontay Johnson area. And then with Aaron Jones as well, I have him like RB19, where you're not expecting a crazy workload, but as you said, like he's amazing. Like in the first week, he had 9 carries and 4 targets, and he turned 13 opportunities into 26.7 points, which is just crazy. So Josh Palmer, I actually just touched on him a little bit. I didn't see, I think they played in the Monday night game, or they played in a primetime game or something like that. No. They played the Chiefs last week. And I didn't see Palmer tweak anything, but he's coming up with a knee injury. Where is he at in terms of playing on Sunday?
It's not looking terrific. Did not practice Wednesday and Thursday, limited Friday. So what that tells me is, one, we don't know if he's going to play or not. If he does, he's more than likely on a reduced snap rate. And he's a guy that's been like slowly getting better each year, but it's been slowly getting better. He's not making significant leaps. And with Mike Williams going down, he's been an okay starter on your fantasy roster. But with this injury, I do not see him playing a full snap share. Therefore, opportunities are going to be more limited. I wouldn't start him this week if you can avoid it. I actually think Quentin Johnson, I know he's done nothing all year. He hasn't really even shown flashes. But in DFS, I don't know what his price is, but it's probably pretty cheap. This could be the week to take a flyer on him, just because I don't see Palmer having a full workload this week due to this injury. Next week we'll revisit it. Could be totally different story because it doesn't sound like a majorly severe injury. But for this week, I'm a little hesitant to start Palmer.
Yeah, that makes sense. And they're playing the Bears as well. I don't want to say that they're going to take their foot off the gas pedal at any point, but it shouldn't be a game where they need Palmer to go out and have 100+ yards for them to win. But after that, we have Jerome Ford, who I'm shocked is even in the mix to play this week. I know I heard it was reported as like I'm sort of curious your thoughts on the verbiage of low grade high ankle sprain. Like what does that mean? How does that work? Because like usually high ankle sprains are pretty brutal.
Right. So remember, there's a spectrum for every injury, every single injury. With ligament injuries, like a high ankle sprain, typically we use the grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 scale. This is very clearly a grade 1 injury. With a grade 1 injury, there is little to no true tissue damage. So it's like less than 10% of the fibers are injured. And there's no what we call laxity or increased motion, because the ligaments, again, they passively keep these bones together in the joints. And when they get torn or partially torn, some of that stability is lost. But with such a low level injury, none of that stability is lost. And that's the big problem with high ankle sprains is when your ankle loses some of its stability. Think of it like if you're trying to cut on grass where it's pretty solid, you can make a forceful cut versus sand. Your foot's going to slide and slosh around and you can't get as forceful of a cut. When you have a bad high ankle sprain, it's like you're cutting on sand. But when it's just a very mild one like this, he's still cutting on grass or turf or something solid. So the key for him to be able to play is just to get pain down. I'm sure there's a little bit of swelling to get that down as well, but it's not a stability issue, which really goes in his favor. We still don't know if he's going to play or not. I was reading some comments from him. He must have probably said at the end of practice tomorrow, where he doesn't even know if he's going to play yet. If he does, though, I would probably expect a little bit lower of a snap rate, especially since they have Kareem Hunt there. But his per play production should not really take too much of a hit. An interesting one to monitor, but I think if you need to start him and he plays, you can do so.
Yeah, I'll probably have him as like a low end RB3 type of guy, like somebody where in this like Miles Sanders, Devin Singletary type of range where, stuff happens. People have to start guys like Jerome Ford every week. But yeah, like you said, I'd imagine he's been kind of the 1A to Kareem Hunt's 1B. I'd imagine off the high ankle, he'll be more of the 1B. But it is interesting that he's, clearing it this fast. But it seems like, yeah, like you said, it's just more of like a rolled ankle than sort of what we saw with like a Khalil Herbert. Now, after that, we have a pair of Seahawks wide receivers. We have DK Metcalf. We have Tyler Lockett. DK Metcalf was the late sort of like inactive, where I think they reported it like right before the 4 p.m. window last week. And I believe that was like ribs with DK Metcalf. And then Tyler Lockett's also been on the injury report all week with a hamstring. How are you feeling about the Seahawks wide receivers? Or I'm actually seeing Metcalf has a hip designation as well. So how does that come into the fold here?
The hip was more the problem with DK. Like he's been dealing with the ribs since week 3 or 4, and he's been playing through that. Not too much of a problem. He missed last week because of the hip, but he's been practicing all week. And a hip injury, like we talked about with Hill, is more likely to impact the lateral agility. DK has never built his game off lateral agility. He gets down the field, and he's a gigantic body. And he uses those two skills very well. That's what makes him great. So, sure, it could slow down his sprint speed a little bit, but with him practicing all week, I doubt that that's a problem anymore. And this injury is certainly not going to make him any smaller. So I am not concerned with DK at all. Like we talked about with Tyreek Hill, receivers actually don't see any decline in their fantasy production when they return from a hip injury. So the question there is like he just hasn't been good all year, but he definitely has the skill set that any week he could go off. As far as Tyler Lockett goes, this is the hamstring that he has been dealing with for a couple weeks now. His production took quite a hit last week, possibly due to the hamstring, possibly just a bad game. But he looks like he's ready to play. We would expect this type of injury to limit top end speed, so like getting down the field, which is a big part of Lockett's game. So may not see him getting too many deep balls, maybe more shorter routes, which could definitely limit his upside. But again, a guy that if you need him, you can still play him. But if there's other guys around his caliber on your bench that you're deciding between, you may make this injury the reason to start somebody else.
Yeah, for me, they're both kind of flex plays. I have them both outside of my top 30 wide receivers. They're both coming off of injury, and the Cleveland Browns have been pretty brutal. They're allowing the 31st most fantasy points to wide receivers right now. So it's going to be a tough matchup. It's going to be a lot of defense there. And I don't know that it's going to be that much easier for the guys on the ground. Myles Garrett was an absolute monster last week. Now, Kenneth Walker, I didn't know that Kenneth Walker was dealing with anything. He took on pretty much the bulk of the workload because we saw Zach Charbonnet wasn't playing last week. Where are we at with Kenneth Walker right now? I have him written down as a calf injury.
Yeah. He did not practice Wednesday or Thursday, and then logged, I believe, a full practice yesterday, and is off the injury report. Here's what we need to think about. The calf is vital for acceleration and sprinting. So that's a huge part of being a running back, obviously. And they do carry that about a 14 to 16% recurrence rate. We already saw that with Joe Burrow this year. But interestingly, on average, running backs don't see a decline in fantasy production when they return from a calf injury. However, only 25% of them meet or exceed their pre-injury baseline fantasy points in that first game back. And there's a couple major outliers here that are really skewing the data. If we remove Jeff Wilson from 2020 from the data set, that so how I said before, running backs on average see no decline in fantasy production. That actually becomes a 23% decline in fantasy production on
Wow.
average by just removing one player, because Jeff Wilson just went absolutely nuts in this first game back from injury. So I would expect a little bit of a dip in production for Walker. That said, I think he's like the running back 6 or something on the year. So even a few less points is probably still going to be productive for him. And the running back landscape is terrible. So of course you're starting him. Just you may want to temper your expectations for a major upside this week for him.
Yeah, he's probably more of a back end RB1, and that's kind of to be expected. I have him as RB13. Again, the Browns defense has just been. I know they let up like 30 plus points to the Colts last week, but that was kind of an anomaly for them. Regardless, though, that is interesting. I do say, or I do have Charbonnet as kind of an interesting guy this week that maybe he could take a little bit more of the workload than usual. But after that, we have another running back, and these are kind of more of players that don't really seem like they're going to play this week. Or actually, I have one more that's probably going to play. But David Montgomery is interesting. He has like had games where he takes 30 carries, gets hurt, sits out 2 weeks, takes 30 carries, sits out 2 weeks. And now we're kind of on the other side of that. It seems like he's not going to play this week, but I'm just kind of curious what you think of where he's at. I know it's a rib injury, which you've sort of talked about as like a more of a pain tolerance thing.
Yeah, didn't practice all week. He's not looking like he's going to play this week. They are more pain tolerance than anything else, but also there are some key muscles that attach on the ribs that are involved in carrying a football and not fumbling. So there could be some functional stuff there as well. But one that's not looking like he's going to play this week should be the Jahmyr Gibbs show again, and we will revisit Montgomery next week.
Yep, he has a bye next week, which seems like it would make sense. You don't play, you take a bye, and then week 10, he'll be back and ready to go. Now we also have Kyler Murray here, who logged his first full participation in a practice this week, I think. It seems pretty unlikely that he plays this week, but just kind of what are your thoughts on Kyler working back from, I believe, the ACL injury here? Seems like this is a pretty long recovery for an ACL, but I can't really remember the timeline.
No, he's right on track. Actually, this is still kind of early. His injury was in December. Surgery was January 3rd. So he's not even 10 months out yet. By next week, he will be 10 months out. That's an acceptable time frame. 10 months. 9 is really the cutoff for major increased risk for a re-injury. 9 months. So I really don't like it when I see these guys return faster than that. 10 is reasonable, especially since it was only in an ACL, no other tissues involved, and he's still pretty young. So I wouldn't be surprised if they start pushing to get him to play maybe next week or the week after. And this has always been the time frame that I was expecting. We heard some people thinking, oh, he's going to be ready week 1. No, he was never going to be ready week 1. That was never part of the equation. But next week or the week after, I would expect to see him out there. I would not expect to see much of a hit on his throwing production. However, he obviously uses his legs quite a bit. I think that will be lagging really throughout the rest of the season. But then next year, we should see him back to the Kyler Murray that we know.
Now, I know Kyler's not. I know Burrow's not the same rusher that Kyler was, but it was interesting to see if you look at the rookie year for Joe Burrow, second year, third year, Burrow's scrambling, rushing went all down. People don't really realize, but Joe Burrow can move a little bit. In college, like at LSU, he ran quite a bit. But yeah, that does make sense. And Kyler is a capable thrower, so I'm actually kind of excited to see what he looks like, almost sort of being forced to be like a true pocket passer here. So I do think that's going to be a nice little boost to like guys like Marquise Brown. And then our last guy here, I just want to touch on Trevor Lawrence. I know that he had a knee brace last week. He was like a true game time decision for that Thursday night game. He played. He was amazing. He even had like a lot of rushing yards in that game, surprisingly. So what are we expecting for him this week? It seems like he's going to play, and just sort of whatever's happened this week's precautionary, but I kind of wanted to hear it from you.
He's full go. We don't need to worry about him at all. Throwing is not going to be a problem. Again, it's his left knee. It's not the one he pushes off of. And we already saw him run for 59 yards like 10 or 11 days ago coming off this injury. Totally fine. Don't need to worry about him or any of his pass catchers.
Yep. That was actually his best rushing game of the season, was last week with a knee brace on. But that's kind of a weird quirk of, I was talking about that the other day, but the Saints allow like a ton of scrambling, as good as their defense is. But that's going to do it for us today. As always, I do appreciate your time greatly, Tom, for coming on here. I know that you are traveling and still making time to do these shows, so I do appreciate that. Let the people know where they can find you, what you got going on, everything on that side of the coin for you.
Yeah, you can follow my personal Twitter at Fantasy Injury T. You can follow the Fantasy Injury Team Twitter at injury_fantasy. You can subscribe and download our podcast, Fantasy Injury Team, on all platforms, our YouTube channel as well, Fantasy Injury Team. We are also on TikTok and Instagram.
Of course. And I'll make sure I'll link pretty much all of your socials and links down below in the description, the comment section, so you guys can check out all of Tom's work. I do think that Tom has some of the best in the entire space. But I appreciate you guys coming out here, watching. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you leave a like, comment, all of that good stuff. And I will see you guys in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm